So today we are going to spend some time tying up the different things that we've discussed so far. Again, I keep coming back to the analogy of different pieces of thread and the fabric that helps us to see the entirety of the picture. So I mentioned earlier that two things. The Buddha, on being questioned by different people with different motivations, different interests, always used to tell them, I teach one thing and one thing only, that is suffering and the cessation of suffering. Why do dissatisfactory experiences happen in human life and how to put an end to that? Okay. The other thing was the presentation, the core presentation of his entire teaching, of his understanding that the Buddha shared was in the form of the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth, the truth or of suffering, right? Dukkha. The second noble truth or the origin of suffering, the basis of suffering, dukkha samudaya, which is craving. The third noble truth, which is the cessation of suffering, or dukkha nirodha, which is through the cessation of craving. And finally, the fourth noble truth was telling people that this is possible in your own life, in their own lives, which is through a method presented as the Noble Eightfold Path. So I have threatened to elaborate on this a few times, and today is going to be the day that we take the different things that we've covered and see how they fit in the Noble Eightfold Path. So one of the big challenges, and there's a nice myth around this, difficult to know what's the reality of it is, but the story goes that the Buddha had his awakening. So for years he tried a lot of practices. He subjected himself to extreme austerities. And then at one point, so there was a incident. I won't go too much into the story of that right now, but he was literally dying, right? And there was this woman who came and offered him some rice and milk, and he had a little taste of that. Until then, he had been living off one grain of rice a day or something like that. And at that moment, he remembered a time in his childhood when he was sitting below an apple tree and there was some ceremony or procession or some festival happening around. And at that time, his mind was completely at peace. There was no friction with reality, right? And he remembered that and realized perhaps these extreme austerities that he was subjecting himself to was not really leading to the right results, and maybe he needs to cultivate something. So the other extreme that he had been brought up with was a life of luxury, right? So he uh, decided to explore a pleasant, peaceful middle path to try and understand how the mind works, how suffering comes about. Right? And this was what he experienced was the first jhana. We discussed the jhanas, what he had experienced in his childhood accidentally was the first jhana, and from there he actually developed the technique. So I mentioned this right in the beginning. So this has been pretty much lost in popular understanding of Buddhism or the revival of the whole mindfulness movement. But the jhanas is the practice that repeatedly the Buddha, more than there is not even a comparison in the number of times that the Buddha actually prescribes the jhanas as the method to improve understanding and to move towards awakening. So he did this. He went through an entire series of experiences where he understood a lot of things. He had uh, a lot of visions and knowledges, understanding his own past births, understanding how the mind works, understanding the lives and different births of all living beings. So he had a lot of visions that happened on the night of his awakening. And then he decided, this is a lot of information. There is no way that I'm going to be able to explain this to anyone. Over the years, it may be argued that there are people who have accidentally, there are a lot of very, very impressive personalities that are known. They have Ramana Maharishi. Mahatma Gandhi can be arguably one of those people in different cultures, different nations. There have been people who have experienced this for themselves, and it has happened perhaps accidentally. But the biggest challenge has been the inability of theirs to create a repeatable process for others to follow and reach awakening for themselves. So this was where the Buddha distinguished himself. He spent, so once he decided that this is too much information, this is too complex, nobody who's conditioned by, cravings, clinging, compulsive behavior, there is no way they're going to open their mind and listen. And the myth goes like he was visited by one of the Brahmas and requested that, hey, this is actually not fair that you have such an amazing knowledge with you, such an amazing understanding that you have achieved. You should really think about sharing this. And the Buddha spent some time thinking about it and finally said, okay, I think there are people with little dust in their eyes that will be ready to receive a teaching if I present it in the right way. And he put together the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is what we will cover today, what the Noble Eightfold Path is. A lot of it is things that we've already been practicing in different ways. So you won't find something startlingly different, but you'll be able to see how all those things fit in with each other. Okay. So that is one thing. And the other thing I'd like to touch upon is there is this huge idea of awakening that people are, either talk very casually about, or people are extremely afraid to even come near that topic. So how this practice that we've been doing, how the Buddha's teaching leads to different levels of understanding, different levels of insights, and that can be very transformational, right? So I just want to touch a little bit on that today. Okay, so I'll start with a segment of a sutta reading. I won't do an entire sutta, and we'll then discuss the Eightfold Path. The sutta that I'll be using today is the Culavedalla Sutra, okay, the shorter series of questions and answers. This is number 44 in the Majjhima Nikaya, or the middle-length discourses of the Buddha. So this is one of those suttas which are not spoken by the Buddha, but what happens is the students of the Buddha, they have an exchange and they go back to the Buddha and verify whether this was correct, whether the thought process was correct in this, right? And the ones that are preserved today are the ones that typically the Buddha says, yes, I would have explained it in the same way. This is interesting because there's a conversation between Visakha, who and his wife Dhammadina, who became a arahant or enlightened. We'll talk about the different stages of enlightenment as well, or awakening as well. Visakha was a anagami and Dhammadina was a arahant, and we'll just touch upon what that means. Okay, I'll start the sutta now. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Rajagriha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary. Then the lay follower, Visakha, went to the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina, and after paying homage to her, he sat down at one side and asked her, Lady, identity is said. What is called identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, These five aggregates affected by clinging are called identity by the Blessed One. That is, the material form aggregate affected by clinging, the feeling aggregate affected by clinging, the perception concepts aggregate affected by clinging, the conditioning aggregate affected by clinging, and the consciousness aggregate affected by clinging. These five aggregates affected by clinging are called identity by the Blessed One. Saying, "Good lady," the lay follower Visakha delighted and rejoiced in the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina's words. Then he asked her a further question. "Lady, origin of identity. Origin of identity is said. What is called the origin of identity by the Blessed One?" Friend Visakha, it is craving which brings renewal of being. It's accompanied by delight and lust, and delights in this and that. That is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for being, craving for non-being. This is called the origin of identity by the Blessed One. Lady, cessation of identity. Cessation of identity is said. What is called the cessation of identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, it is the remainderless fading away and ceasing, the giving up, relinquishing, letting go, and rejecting of that same craving. This is called the cessation of identity by the Blessed One. Lady, the way leading to the cessation of identity. The way leading to the cessation of identity is said. What is called the way leading to the cessation of identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, it is just this Noble Eightfold Path. That is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Lady, is that clinging the same as these five aggregates affected by clinging? Or is the clinging something apart from the five aggregates affected by clinging? Friend Visakha, clinging is neither the same as the five aggregates affected by clinging, nor is clinging something apart from the five aggregates affected by clinging. It is the desire and lust in regard to the five aggregates affected by clinging that is the clinging there. Lady, how does identity view come to be? Here, friend Visakha, an untaught ordinary person who has no regard for noble ones and is unskilled and undisciplined in their dhamma, who has no regard for true men and is unskilled and undisciplined in their dhamma, regards material form as self, or self as possessed of material form, or material form as in self, or self as in material form. He regards feeling as self, or self as possessed of feeling, or feeling as in self, or self as in feeling. He regards perception as self, or self as possessed of perception, or perception as in self, or self as in perception. He regards conditioning as self, or self as possessed of conditioning, or conditioning as in self, or self as in conditioning. He regards consciousness as self, or self as possessed of consciousness, or consciousness as in self, or self as in consciousness. That is how identity view comes to be. Lady, how does identity view not come to be? Here, friend Visakha, A well-taught noble disciple who has regard for the noble ones and is skilled and disciplined in their dhamma, who has regard for true men and is skilled and disciplined in their dhamma, does not regard material form as self or self as possessed of material form, or material form as in self or self as in material form. He does not regard feeling as self or self as possessed of feeling, or feeling as in self or self as in feeling. He does not regard perception as self or self as possessed of perception, or perception as in self or self as in perception. He does not regard conditioning as self or self as possessed of conditioning, or conditioning as in self or self as in conditioning. He does not regard consciousness as self or self as possessed of consciousness, or consciousness as in self or self as in consciousness. That is how identity view does not come to be. Lady, what is the Noble Eightfold Path? Friend Visakha, it is just this Noble Eightfold Path. That is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Lady, is a Noble Eightfold Path conditioned or unconditioned? Friend Visakha, the Noble Eightfold Path is conditioned. Lady, are the three sections included by the Noble Eightfold Path, or is the Noble Eightfold Path included by the three sections? The three sections are not included by the Noble Eightfold Path, friend Visakha, but the Noble Eightfold Path is included within the three sections: right speech, right action, and right livelihood. These states are included in the section on behavior. Right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. These states are included in the section on mental skills. Right view and right intention. These states are included in the section on understanding. Okay, there are a lot more interesting things in that sutta. I will not cover those today. Before we go to the Noble Eightfold Path, I'll just make a quick comment. Something that we discussed yesterday, been referenced here as well. What is the origin of identity? Right? That's what Visakha asked. It is craving which brings renewal of being. It is accompanied by delight and lust and delights in this and that. That is craving for sensual pleasure and craving for being in this state or that state. This is called the origin of identity by the Blessed One. Ladies, cessation of identity is said. What is called the cessation of identity by the Blessed One? Friend Visakha, it is the remainderless fading away and ceasing, the giving up, relinquishing, letting go, and rejecting of that same craving. This is called the cessation of identity by the Blessed. So this is what we discuss, right? Every time our mind, our attention gets engaged, gets attached to a certain thought with craving, it generates an identity to deal with that situation. It personalizes it. It says the best way to do something that I don't like is by personalizing the entire thing, creating an identity. How do I gain if I get this? How do I lose? What do I lose if I don't prevent this? Right? So the identity arises with craving, and with the cessation of craving, that identity goes away. If the craving is remainderless, that means there is no craving attached with that thought, attached with that situation, then no specific identity that is wanting a specific thing, attached to a specific thing, desperate for a certain outcome comes up. You don't have an identity coming up in that way. But normally, even the craving we give up, there is some remainder left. As we reduce it, we stop identifying with that thing. We keep reducing it till we can get to a point where we don't identify with that particular thing. Some information about it comes up, some outcomes are presented, and it doesn't really matter to us, right? So, for example, somebody cuts you off in traffic and you get extremely irritated about it. If you have a remainderless cessation of that craving, then you don't care. You understand somebody has their compulsive behavior. There is literally nothing you can do except boil your own blood over that. Okay, so that was one thing I wanted to call out. The other thing about identity that came in the other paragraph with respect to the aggregates. So any of the aggregates, for example, someone does not regard material form as self or self as possessed of material form. So you're not thinking of the self as equivalent to material form or like material form is equivalent to self. And you're not saying that material form is a part of self or self is a part of material form. So you're not seeing that. You're understanding it is something that has been quickly put together at that moment to deal with the situation. There is not a permanent self which is contained in your material form. And we have discussed the aggregates like everything else. And if we remember the three characteristics, all of the aggregates are impermanent. They're always changing. So simply logically, there is no way that you can connect something that is, if you think of a permanent self, unchanging eternal self, that cannot be found in the aggregate. That cannot be seen as equivalent to the aggregate. The aggregate cannot be seen as equal to it. That cannot be seen as part of the aggregate, nor can the aggregate be seen as part of that. Okay. So that was another comment on identity in the sutta. And now let's quickly go to the Noble Eightfold Path. So towards the end of the sutta, Dhammadina, towards the end of the part that I read specifically, Dhammadina says the Noble Eightfold Path is contained within three sections. Okay, these are the sections of understanding. This is known as Panya Khanda or Pragya Skand. Right, Pragya is understanding or wisdom. So this is the section on understanding. Second section is Samadhi Skand. So it can be called the section on immersion, which is extremely difficult to understand, or we can simply call it mental skills because this is the section that contains the mental skills, the ones that we've been practicing. And the third section is called Shilaskan. Shil is normally used as a equivalent for ethics or virtuous behavior. So the precepts, for instance, are part of Shil. The precepts that we take in the morning are part of they're also known as the Panchashila. The sixth one is not a traditional historic one found in the suttas, a precept of being kind and loving to oneself and to all beings. But the other five are precepts. Those are actions that the Buddha has taught in a different suttas, that these are behaviors to avoid to create a state that is conducive for the development of the mind. So let's go one by one to every arm of the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is known in Pali, or the Sanskrit equivalent would be Arya Ashtanga Marg. Arya being noble, eightfold. Ashtang means eight-limbed, as people might have heard from yoga, understanding about yoga, and Marg is first path. So the first limb, first part, first fold is Sammaditi. Sammaditi or Samyak Drishti. Perspective, wise understanding can be translated as harmonious perspective. That is how my teacher Bhante used to translated. And what does this mean? Okay, what are we trying to understand? What knowledge is really important for us to be able to develop the mind? So it can be encapsulated in these three areas, the four noble truths, right? Understanding that's acknowledging the existence of suffering. So you cannot work towards the end of dissatisfaction and suffering in your life without first acknowledging and understanding its existence, seeing that it happens, right? The second, the part of the noble truth, of course, is understanding that it is dependent on craving, and with the cessation of craving comes the cessation of suffering, and the fact that this eightfold path actually helps us to get there. The second thing that is important in terms of the understanding, right, is dependent origination. Understanding how different mechanisms of the mind get triggered because the conditions are right for them, and how they're dependent on conditions. By acting on conditions that they're dependent on, things that may be harder to control because we are already very agitated, very emotional, very uh, personally attached to in a situation. Are there links below that we can work with, right? And we will talk about that also. Craving is one link that we definitely can work with, but you can also work at the level of contact, and how we can do that is something I'll talk about a little bit later today. Okay, so understanding dependent origination, understanding how the mind works, understanding how craving works, understanding how clinging works, and how that keeps us engaged in compulsive patterns of thinking and acting. So this is the second important part of samadhi or wise understanding. And the third part is the three characteristics: impermanence, impersonality, and suffering that comes from not understanding impermanence and impersonality. Knowing that all things are impermanent, all things are subject to change. If we personally get attached to things being in a certain configuration, if we tie our happiness to things being in that particular configuration, and we connect it to a permanent, eternal sense of self, that this is what I need to be happy. This is what I need today, tomorrow, day after. This is what I want. If we do that, because conditions are in flux, we will come to the point where I don't get what I want, leading to suffering. So understanding the impermanent nature of things, understanding impersonality is key to understanding and diffusing suffering. Three characteristics. So understanding these concepts. Second part of this is very interesting. This is a word that is very terribly translated wherever you see it in English. Samma Sankalpa or Samyak Sankalp. So Sankalp is a very interesting word. It means resolve. It also means having a vision that we are resolving towards, right? I resolve to do this or to be this. I have a vision of the future and I resolve to work towards. That is what Sankalp means, but it's typically translated as thought or intention, and that doesn't capture what's happening here. So two aspects of this. So actually, I would add probably ran out of space there. But one thing is, once I have understood the Four Noble Truths, you bring up the determination to actually act on it. You understand that there is nothing else that is important for me to do than to actually have an uplifted state of mind. Whatever else I do should be from that uplifted state of mind, right? So there is absolutely no substitute for continuing to be in compulsive and unhappy states of mind. So that determination comes, the energy, the commitment towards putting in your effort also comes from understanding, so it derives from the understanding, from the right perspective, harmonious perspective. So you have that result. So you have that energy, that commitment, that determination, and you start moving yourself from that little constricted identity that comes up every time at the time of craving. You also make you have that vision of this future where you have a expansive and generous and kind and giving attitude in any situation. right? You understand that as soon as it becomes I-centric, as soon as you attach, I want this, I don't want that, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. So you see what is wholesome for me and for other people. What action can I take that brings the maximum benefit for everyone? Right? So that becomes your guiding principle. How do I maintain uplifted states of mind, and how do I act in a way that is beneficial for myself and everyone? So Sankalp is having that vision and having the determination to work towards that vision. Okay, I think some of you can see that I have recycled the dependent origination slide and changed the words. It was very suitable for this purpose. So we have the second section here, which is the what we've been practicing daily. Starting with Samma Vayam, Vayam, Samyak Vyayam. Vyayam is practice, application, exercise. Chosen translation here is harmonious practice. Again, there are two components to this. One is the 6 R's, using the 6 R's whenever our mind gets caught up in something unwholesome, mind gets caught up in a personal chain of thought, it gets agitated and emotional about something. So being able to use the 6 R's and being able to see it with a different attitude rather than that myopic attitude of that identity, small identity that we create. Ending the craving in that moment, in that thought. 6 R's is harmonious practice. There is also a macro level understanding of this, right? So harmonious practice. So Samavayamo is also described as, it is in the sutta that it is described as maintaining a wholesome state of mind, understanding when an unwholesome state of mind comes, letting go of that unwholesome state of mind, and continuing to maintain a wholesome state of mind. So at a micro level, in terms of what you do in the moment, 6 R's encapsulates that, right? You staying with metta, loving kindness, or you're staying with some wholesome action that you're performing. You understand the unwholesome state coming up. You let go of it by releasing it, relaxing the tension. Then you smile and come back to a wholesome state, right? So the 6 R's is the action that you can take at a micro level. But in at large, the idea is also, so if you remember the thought bubbles that we were using, right? So we keep going from gray to red when we get distracted. What we want to do is at a high level, we also want to continue to maintain our mind in wholesome state. So the more time we spend in wholesome states, the more we change our conditioning to act from wisdom. We want to be in those states as much as possible. So whether it is practicing meditation, whether it is active meditation, or whether it is maintaining a wholesome state of mind when you are working on something, right? So it is very closely connected to collectedness. Okay. The next, mindfulness, one of the central pillars that helps us understand what's happening, and this gets automatically refined. So it's difficult to practice mindfulness separately, but when we keep using the 6 R's, we are sharpening this continuously. You can be aware of what's happening, but the tendency will be to start going in areas of craving. Your mind will start craving what to note certain things, or craving to see what's happening. When you use the 6 R's, you have mindfulness that is not affected by craving. So mindfulness, again, I'm not going to go, I've talked a lot about this earlier in the week. Remembering to observe attention and its movement. Where is your attention? How is it engaged with the contents of your awareness? What is vying for your attention, and how does attention move from one thing to another? And finally, collectedness, the jhanas, staying with your mind in a wholesome state, being able to keep it there, developing it in a way that the tendency to run after other information is not very high. Keeping it in a way that your mind is easily with the object of meditation, the object of your attention, the object of your work, if you're doing, and yet it's aware of other things that are happening. So it's able to continue to be engaged with the rest of reality without having to chase after everything, comfortably placed with the object of meditation. Then comes behavior. Okay, so this is now all of these, if you think about it, all of these feed into each other. So better behavior helps us with better understanding. Better understanding helps us with better behavior. Better behavior affects how collected, how restless, or agitated our mind is, and vice versa. The more we practice, the more we are able to move towards better behaviors. Just like the suttas, the Eightfold Path is also interlinked. Everything feeds into everything. It's not necessarily linear. That okay, I start with this, and once I've mastered this, I move on to the next level. You cultivate all of them together. So the first of this of the behavior is samma vacha. Vacha or samyak vachan. Right speech is the common way to translate this, but when the Buddha talks about verbal actions, right? So this is also seen. So this is not just things you say, but this also extends to the way you understand things, the way you rationalize things in your mind, the way you think about things. We use language to think about situations. We use language to create opinions of people, opinions of situation. So harmonious communication, samma vacha, is important not just for what you say. So if you say I'm keeping the precept because I didn't say something harsh to someone, but in your mind you are using every colorful adjective that you can think of, so you're not really doing harmonious communication, right? Thinking, communicating with yourself and about yourself as well. So it's not just about others, about situations, but also how you think about yourself. Thinking and communicating, the words, the constructs of language that you use to think, that you use to communicate, from a base of the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, and joy. Samma kammanto, harmonious actions. The right action is the translation, not too different. It is often talked of as only being the precepts, but we will look at a more expansive definition of it, which is acting with the base of the Brahma Vihara. So if you act with the benefit of all beings in your mind. So this affects. So every time you don't act with it, every time you break a precept, what is happening is you have allowed the craving to become so strong, that identity that has developed in that moment to become so strong that you will do anything in its service, right? You will do anything to achieve the objectives of the identity. There's an interesting sutta where the Buddha, his son Rahula, joins his comes to him for training, and the Buddha tells Rahul, one who is it seems like a very strong statement. One who is not afraid to, not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie, there is nothing that person will not do. And what is he saying? So what happens is, in a particular situation, when the craving gets to a certain extent, we say, let me break the precept. Let me do something that is harmful for myself or for others, just to satisfy the want, the like, dislike of this identity that is created here, right? And typically our rationalization is, I had no other option. Or I said it, did you see what the other person said? Did you see what they did? And therefore I'm justified. So once we start going down the path of rationalizing uncompassionate, unwholesome behavior, there is no end to it. So the Buddha says, doesn't say that if you lie, you are going to kill a puppy the next day. He doesn't say that you're definitely going to do it, but the point is you are already on that slippery slope. You have decided that as long as, if I want it badly enough, I can rationalize my action, right? And that slope not only strengthens your craving, right? It adds as fodder for your craving, but it also affects your conditioning. It affects your ability to think about different situations, your ability to act wholesomely. And all these actions affect our practice, affect our mindfulness, affect our collectedness. So the things we take personally, the things that we break our precepts for, is something that is taken very personally. And for us to be able to see that objectively, that situation, and not get completely agitated by it, will be a long way away. The conditioning becomes very tight in that situation. And this is a very interesting one. Again, this is very insufficiently described in the suttas as well, which is Samma Ajivo or Samyak Ajivika or harmonious lifestyle. So at the Buddha's time, he has mentioned there are certain things that it's unwholesome to act in, trading in uh, arms and ammunition and alcohol and flesh trade, etc. So there are some examples that the Buddha has given, but perhaps because he was a lot of the information preserved is the instruction that was given to monks, so there is not much that is given in terms of defining lifestyle, and that is one of the attempts that we are doing, is to try to make it more relevant for people living a lay lifestyle, people who are integrated in society, to be able to figure out how to improve their life. So harmonious lifestyle means I would say, so instead of livelihood or saying that okay, there are 4 professions that are banned, and then that's pretty much the instruction. So the idea is to create a harmonious lifestyle, a lifestyle that encourages development of mind, encourages you to move towards happiness, right? So how do you change that? You work with changing your habits, that is overlap with harmonious actions, and you change your environment, right? So how can environment affect? So I had mentioned earlier that not only can you work with craving, but you can also work with contact. For instance, how do you work with contact? For example, if you're in an environment, if you're in a job where you have explicit information, explicit instructions to deceive customers or other people that you're talking about, so you will have no option but to participate in actions that are not conducive for your mental development, for your moving towards happiness. That is an environment you should choose to do. You should choose to change that. And by doing that, you're changing the context. So if you hang out with a bunch of people who take great joy in bullying someone, and it is possible at some point of life you may have been part of that. I have been part of that in my college days. So, and I'm not at all proud of that. But the point is, you can change the kind of people you are with, So one of the things that the Buddha always says is associating with people who have a positive impact on your mind and your mental development is very important. So those are things you can do to change contact. So if you have, for example, addiction to junk food, to XYZ, so you can simply keep them less accessible in your environment. This is one of the very core tenets of habit science, right? Changing environment as well. So harmonious lifestyle is about changing environment, about understanding why we are in a certain environment, why we are in relation with a bunch of people. So what is it that we really want? What can we contribute to this relationship? How does it affect us? And changing the outline, the nature of your interaction, so that it supports your development of your mind. So this is the Eightfold Path. The section on understanding, section on mental skills, section on behavior. So tomorrow we will spend a little more time on the behavior part. We have spent a fair amount of time in developing our practice individually, and I've been working with all of you, and very happy to share that there's been great progress made across the board. And we've been using the talks to develop further the understanding. I hope by now, by the strength of your own practice and the things that we've discussed, your sankalp would also be strengthening, right? And tomorrow we will spend some more time understanding how these skills and this understanding can be used to actually make changes in life. So whether it is communication, whether it is actions, whether it is lifestyle. So more on specifics on different frameworks you can use to start modifying your life. So that we'll spend some time on tomorrow. So I'll just take a pause here. There is another small section I want to just touch, maybe a few minutes on, maybe 5 or 7 minutes on the topic of awakening or the topic of transformational events in practice, right? Before that, I'll just take a pause and happy to hear any thoughts, any questions that you may have. Since I have the screen on, you may want to just unmute yourself and ask the question. I will not be able to see all of you. Okay, great. If something comes up, I'll pause again for questions to after the brief section on awakening, right? So let me go into that, right? So the Buddha says this path leads us to the end of suffering, right? Cessation of craving. And how does it do that? How do these things come together, right? So the first thing, in terms of the practice, the lifestyle, the behavior that we do actually changes our ability to go deeper into the practice. The more and more wholesome things we do, changes our conditioning, changes the kind of things that come and take our attention away, allows us to go deeper in our practice. We keep developing our practice. As we develop our practice, we see for ourselves what we have discussed intellectually or what we have discussed with visual aids, right? We start seeing the arising and passing of phenomena. We start understanding craving. We start understanding how identity forms in the moment, right? And that keeps reinforcing the understanding segment. What happens is, and like I mentioned, for awakening, the Buddha always talks about using the jhanas. So, what is awakening, or what is this event that happens? Normally, there is a very sense of this is something where you will just explode, start levitating, start having a halo, walk through walls and start mind reading and other lots of interesting speculations about what happens. Okay, so I want to just talk about it through the jhanas. Like I said, the Buddha always talks about the jhanas to reach that state. There is a sutta, I didn't read it during this retreat called the Anupat Sutra. If you are interested, I'll send a link to that. You should definitely go through that. It describes all the jhanas. So Sariputta, who's an expert with the jhanas, one of the Buddha's foremost students. So he went through the jhanas, described what happens in each jhana. And a lot of you who are experiencing different jhanas are actually seeing. That is the amazing thing. Like I said, the amazing thing about the Buddha and very distinguished himself was the ability to give a repeatable practice that normal common people can start and actually start experiencing the things that have been talked about there. So there are 8 jhanas. We discussed that and how that progresses and what happens is something I'll talk about. The first 4 jhanas, they're called the Rupa jhanas because you still feel a lot more connected with your body. You have just started getting into collected states. The first jhana is typically distinguished by a feeling of joy that is coming up, and your mind starts becoming stable for the first time. Again, I won't go into all the factors. I'll just give a high level idea of what the different jhanas feel and look like, and then what happens in the 8th, and then what happens. Second jhana, typically you will start seeing the mind become a little more confident. So it's like, when you start riding your bike, after a little while, you feel that, what, I can probably do 30 meters at a go without getting off the bike. You start getting that confidence, and you also find that the mental chatter in your mind starts going down. So there's a lot of background commentary that's happening that will start coming down a little bit. That is the second jhana. By the third jhana, you start feeling parts of your body disappear. So what's happening is that your mind is sensitive to change. So it's always looking for change in the environment, right? So right now there is nothing else moving in the room, so my attention is not really going there. But if something was to fall down, my attention would immediately go there. Similarly, if you go under a very cold shower, neither the temperature of your body falls significantly nor the temperature of the water changes. But after a while, your body says, "Hey, this is a constant thing. There is no change in the environment, so I'm not. I don't need to really worry about it. I don't need to send alerts about it, right?" So as we keep sitting still, which is why sitting still is important. By the third jhana, we start. The mind says, "You know what? We are in a safe space, and I am completely uninterested in the body. And right at the moment, I'm sending metta. I'm looking at distraction, and I'm coming back, right? So the body parts feel like they're disappearing. So if something, comes and touches you, a fly comes and sits on you, something, you'll be able to feel it. But unless you take your attention to your body, you won't really feel as embodied. So this starts to happen by the third jhana. By the fourth jhana, this deepens a little bit more. You also develop very strong equanimity by then. Like you're very stable, you're very confident in your practice. Your energy levels start going a lot higher, right? And from there we start going towards the arupa jhanas. Arupa jhanas is where you're completely stop bothering about your body. So the first of these is the base of infinite space with compassion. Okay? So your feeling of metta changes to a feeling of karuna, and a lot of people sometimes have visions of seeing other people's distress in this, right? So it's a common thing. Not everybody does. Some people are more prone to visualizations, and this happens because the feeling of compassion is coming up in you, and alongside that, you start feeling a sense of expansion in your head. You feel like there is no longer anything between your mind and the rest of the world to which you're sending out a positive feeling. Right? So this is the base of infinite space. Then as we go through the base of infinite space, we go to the base of infinite consciousness, which is the sixth, which is written incorrectly here. I'll fix it before sharing. And by this time, the feeling changes to mudita, or joy, rejoicing, right? Altruistic joy, appreciative joy. So we went from metta to karuna as we started deepening our practice, started understanding how we create suffering in our lives, how we experience suffering in our lives, start understanding that with craving. As we start understanding that, we also start understanding that other people are fighting the same battle. Right? That becomes karuna, understanding the suffering of others and having goodwill for them. And mudita becomes the next step, where the alleviation of suffering for another, you celebrate as if it is an alleviation of your own suffering. So you have that appreciative joy. When somebody gets something good, you don't become less, but you become happier for their joy. You may also encounter a bit of, so by the base of infinite consciousness, you start seeing different contacts happening. Right? So in your mind, could be thoughts, it could be things on your skin, your hair, it could be sounds that you're hearing, it could be the light that's falling on you. You start seeing it in very, very minute detail. Right? So a snap of the fingers becomes like hundreds of thousands of little incidents of sound. You may not catch all of them individually, but you can feel that it is actually so many different events of consciousness that are getting arisen every time contact is happening. From there, your mind becomes very tranquil, very stable, very balanced, very confident. And this is the base of nothingness with equanimity. Here you start seeing the very beginning of the contacts and very few of them. Your mind becomes extremely stable. There is not too much mental activity happening, and you're seeing them right in the beginning. You relax them then and there. And with time, the equanimity also dries out, and you make the field of awareness your object of meditation. From there, the mind may go even deeper to the eighth jhana. The eighth jhana has a very easy to roll off your tongue name. It's called the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So what's happening? So you till now you've been able to identify that something is happening, something is coming up, something moving somewhere, right? Starting to do that. But here you enter a stage where you are kind of neither awake nor asleep. Your mind is registering things, but it is not getting to the point of perception, full perception, where it says that was a little wobble, that was a thing that came up, that was a thought that's coming up, right? It doesn't get to that point to labeling, but it is registering that things are happening. And you might feel like you're either, you may feel like you're both awake and asleep, because when you come out of the state, you're very alert, very sharp. You know that you didn't nod off, you didn't just go off to sleep, right? So if you fall asleep while you're sitting in a class or on a flight or generally on a couch or chair, your body goes all limp and starts falling around, and you know that is not alert, right? But when you come out of the neither perception or non-perception, you understand your mind was very alert, right? You try to recollect some of the things where after you come out of this practice, you try to recollect some of the things that the mind registered, but that did not get to the point of perception, and you use the 6 hours with them. As the mind, so all the while, right, from the first 4 jhanas till the 8th jhana, the amount of mental activities coming down continuously, 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 continuously. And what happens is, you may, if the conditions are right, have a cessation event. And with the right kind of cessation event, what happens is all these things. So you have contact, you have feeling, craving, clinging, action, the habitual tendencies, action, all these like different threads that are happening one after the other. So these are discrete events, but to your mind it seems continuous. You have a continuous identity, just different facets of the identity are getting exposed right now, right? So what happens is, because the mental activity is going down, there will be a little gap. So everything stops for a second. And then when you come back, there will be one thread of this: contact, feeling, craving, habitual tendency, action. So this will happen. And in fact, everything from ignorance to the sense basis, everything kind of triggers. So it's like literally, your operating system just pausing for a second and then coming back online. And what happens is your mind sees this. And we can talk about this for days on end. But when your mind actually sees this happening, so that is like seeing the actual trick behind the magician's trick, right? So it is like understanding the illusion, understanding exactly what is happening, no longer knowing that hey, this is just something. I have no idea what happened and how this magic is being presented. You're actually seeing the magic in action, and you're seeing that it is a process. So that is what is. This is an event. It's known as it's called Nibbana or Nirvan, and called awakening, enlightenment. But because there are a lot of connotations to that, simply think about this as a very transformational event of understanding. And what happens is, this is so vivid, and so you don't necessarily remember what you saw, but your mind has seen it. So in verbal terms, you may not be able to describe what happened too well, but your mind has seen the reality. So it's for example, if you saw your friend turn into a vampire, like life will never be the same again, right? Or if you find out your friend is Spider-Man, right? So life is never the same in terms of that. So it's like once you've seen that, your mind has seen even a glimpse of that, right? It doesn't need to have an extended amount of time with that. your understanding of everything we've discussed completely changes. Your conditioning changes in an very strongly in an instant. Like a lot of major tectonic shifts happen in conditioning, in ignorance, in all across the entire links of dependent origination. And there's a very beautiful and very apt description. The first time this happens is known as giving up an ocean of suffering. Right? And when a cessation events happen, so cessation doesn't mean, again, like I said, the awakening doesn't mean that you'll start floating, walking through walls, and you will never make a mistake in any at any point in your life. You will be able to do the work of 500 people. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that you understand the process of your suffering. Your conditioning changes very significantly, and your ability to stick to the Eightfold Path, your ability to live a harmonious lifestyle, perform harmonious actions, harmonious communication with yourself, your ability to go deep in the practice, your ability to understand things just changes fundamentally. So it's not an incremental change. Okay? And there are some 8 stages of awakening. So I'll just briefly touch upon that. Again, these are levels of understanding. You really, I mean, you can say you go from illiteracy to maybe a graduate level understanding, then you have a PhD level understanding, then you have a postdoc level understanding. So these are different levels of understanding. And they are categorized as 4 types of noble disciples or awakened people, and with 2 subcategories. You should not worry too much about it. The best measure of your practice is how you behave, the mistakes that you make, and the intention to fix them. But just because it is something that people are curious about, I'm just sharing. So the first time you have a cessation event, you become what is called a Shrotapan or Sotapan. Sotapana is translated as stream enterer or Shrotapan, right? And this is somebody who's entered the stream of the Dhamma, the understanding of how things actually work, understanding of phenomena. Dhamma in this context is not just the teaching, but the natural law of mental phenomena. And with each of these categories, you have something called a marga and a phala. So somebody who has seen the way, marga, and somebody who's eaten the fruit of that, right? So who has kind of fructified that understanding. They've come to a certain level of understanding. It's a semantic. The next after more cessation events, you become something called a Sotapan or Sotapana with phala, right? Fruition of that path. And then you have Sakadagami, Margaphala, Anagami, Margaphala, and Arahant. So the way these are defined is Sakadagami is someone who returns to life 7 times. Anagami, who's a Sakadagami who returns back to life, has a rebirth, only one rebirth. Anagami is a non-returner. They won't have any rebirth in any realm lower than the human realm. And Arahant is someone who's completely, has no craving left in them. Right? So we won't go too much into the details of these. Just suffice to say that the one event is not something that will make a shooting star out of you. There are like different stages of awakening as well, and the extreme is Arahant. Arahant experiences no craving. In every instant, they will act compassionate. They will have some conditioning that is left over. If they preferred chocolate over vanilla, they'll still have a more pleasant feeling come up when they eat chocolate versus when they eat vanilla. But their actions will always be compassionate and without craving, right? So that is kind of the gradation. And again, it is a continuous education that happens till the point you become Arahant. So Arahant is like the gold standard. So you can say that Arahant is in action would be similar to the Buddha. In terms of understanding, of course, there would be no comparison to what the Buddha would have understood, but an arahant is, in terms of action and in terms of experience of life, they would be right up there. And already, when you go from have the first cessation event, there is a ocean of suffering that you give up in life. So this is how the practice can take you, and does take people towards cessation and the first of the awakening, or first of, let's we can choose to use the word of first significant transformational event. Okay, great. We've had a long session today. Uh, any questions, any thoughts?
Uh,
Yes, sir.
I actually had a couple of questions, sorry, but
Don't be sorry.
almost rudimentary actually. First I wanted to know is that when we speak about the jhanas and the different phases, um, is there actually uh, a moment in time, I mean, after you're practicing where it becomes sort of uh, unforced, or where you're doing it, you don't really need to sit in a meditative state, or you really don't need to think about it, but you're in that like zone for a longer sustained period of time. And sorry, the second thing I also wanted to ask was that generally in the precepts in our morning routine as well, rejoicing is a word that, and even in the suttas, it comes up very often. So in the mudita jhana, I mean, does something happen after that? Given that that's also rejoicing. Is there some like uh phase shifting that happens?
Yeah, so actually the words are different. This is mudita, that the one in the Dhammapada is
Hmm.
actually pramoja or pramod, right?
Okay.
Similar root words, the mo, is
Hmm.
similar, but yeah, so it is generally a feeling of joy, of celebration, right?
Hmm.
And mudita specifically also inclusive of others'
Others joy.
joy, right? See, what's happening is, like we talked about lifestyle, communication, right? So everything is, all the conditioning is changing. So every time you keep, so this is literally you are, training yourself to be better, right? So every time you say use the 6 hours, you're reducing craving, you're sharpening your mindfulness, you're also making this an automatic process, right? At some level, you may find that your mind 6 hours thing automatically. Now let's take the example of somebody honking or cutting you off in traffic, right? So over time, you 6 hour it, you realize, okay, well, first you run away about it. For the first time, you go the entire day cursing that person and wanting to put spikes on your car or something like that, right? And then you get to, okay, after a while you start thinking about something else, or you start understanding the craving. After a few 6 hours, you feel, okay, this is not worth my time. And then a day comes when that happens, and you absolutely don't care. You understand. You actually send a good wish to this person that, hey, you seem to be in a hurry, or you seem to be agitated. I hope you will be fine and safe, and mutual. And that is a great, eventually anything that we keep, right? So about hatred, it's often said, right? It is poison you drink and hope for another person to die. So it's like that. You keep what you keep in your mind is reflected in the world you experience. What you have in your mind is reflected in the world you experience, right? So that's what's happening. So you're changing that. The skills you're changing continuously, so it becomes easier and easier, right? So somebody who exercises becomes good at certain movement, right? So it is like that. So we keep exercising, and here what's happening is also you're changing the underlying condition, right? So like a person who's exercising, they are becoming familiar with the movement. Their mind body coordination is becoming better. The musculature is changing, right? Their ability to draw a lot of energy instantly, have the adrenaline rushing, and all of that thing changes, right? So it's like that. So when you start practicing the three mental skills, when you start creating conditions. So you can't practice the skills and then do something absolutely contradictory, because then your system is not getting conditioned in the right way, right? So things become more and more natural. It doesn't become an effort, right? So to stay and act out of the Brahma Viharas doesn't become an effort. Skill in every moment is something that you have to continuously develop, right? So it's to live a generous, expansive, all inclusive life, right? Where you're looking at the benefit of everyone. It requires a tightrope walk, right? You can become really good at it, but it is a tightrope walk, because there are a lot of things that you can do wrong, but you can become a master of it, right? There are people who have walked the tightrope between the twin towers, right? So you can become that confident and that natural at it. Great. Did you had another part to the question?
No, no, this is not. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? Yes, sir. Did you have a question, Rahul? Thought you raised your hand.
Yeah, I do. I'm still finding the words or formulating it into a sentence, because so reaching that stage of cessation and then continuing on that path forward, right, requires deviation, if you may, from the life that one leads, and the more you progress in one direction, the more you will deviate from what a normal life or a lifestyle looks like for most of us, or for me, or for a few people like me, right? Now, as much as one sees the benefits in pursuing this, and going in that direction, and reaping the benefits of ending all craving for oneself, considering that one is a social animal and has to live in a world where there are other people who do also have cravings, often you will have to participate, or be present in other people's cravings as well. And so, because my point is that like, being an arihant is maybe not for everyone, right? Like, but and going down that path is also maybe not for everyone. So what's that level which is great?
The Goldilocks band.
Yeah, but is not like
The
breakthrough,
Goldilocks
amazing.
level of awakening.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. No, so it's simply growing up, right? You don't have the same preferences and tastes or same type of company. You don't partake in the same activities as you did 10 years back. It's this simplest way, I can say, right? So when you grow up, you adapt, right? And you don't keep an arahant as a goal, right? There is a lot of work to do. Just so starting with this practice is like knowing that there is a mango, okay, and maybe the first session, or just having a smell of a mango, right? And then maybe the first cessation event is like you've had a little bit of mango juice, and then finally you become the person who's eaten the mango, right? So it's a very very long way off. And the thing is that in terms of social this thing, right? So you will find that there are social interactions that are inherently bad for you, and you would have seen that even in the past. you would have modified your environment once you realize that certain things are definitely not working for you, they're definitely not good for you, right? So it's the same thing. Once it's just that your understanding changes, right? So, uh, you know, think about a child insisting that I won't grow up if I have to stop believing in Santa Claus, right? So that is essentially the equivalent we are talking about. As you change your mind, as you grow up, your actions, your preferences will also change accordingly. And the more important thing is, because you're building a foundation on certain things, you'll be able to navigate a compassionate way out of it, right? So that's the important part of it. Does that help? I don't want to call out one Goldilocks band because things will change along the way. There is no Goldilocks band, right? You need to be better than you were yesterday. That is, you need to, and again, it's for you, right? Once you understand how suffering works, once you understand it is completely a creation of your mind, then depending on your resolve, you will go further with it, right? And as you experience new things, that will change. Just like growing up, right? It's not just 1 year and then a decade later. So as you understand new things, as you experience new things, your thinking will change continuously.
Why I ask this question is that, in a normal day, staying true to the precepts sometimes is probably the hardest thing that you're doing.
Yes.
Like
it
like
can be.
some,
Yes.
Like some precepts come very naturally. Like you will not knowingly harm a living being, or I will not harm a living being on purpose, right? So like I'm making sure that I'm not. The number of ants or worms that I may be stepping on when I'm
That's
taking
fine.
my
You're
dog.
not intentionally harming them.
Yeah, but that's not intentional, right? However, not indulging in slander, not indulging in unwholesome communication about someone. You may not be doing it, you may not even be thinking about it, but say if someone else is talking about it, and even by not responding to it, or by just nodding, there is a part of you that's kind of conforming to their beliefs, and that's your precepts broken right there, right? Or like in the UK, going out and having a pint is a culture. that breaks a precept immediately, right? Because you are partaking in alcohol. So is the purpose of this?
Yeah. So okay, I'll just make a quick comment and then you can ask further if. So, like I said, living a good life is a tightrope walk, right? So don't take things as set in stone. See the effect that it has on your mind. Okay.
Yeah.
Let your mind, your state of mind, and the action, and when you do that, then don't get into rationalization and justification, right? So because that we can. If you pick up the worst villain that you think existed in human history, they will have a rationalization for why they did what they did. Right? So don't rely on rationalization. See the effect on your mind. See what it does in terms of your mind states, and ask your intuition for. This is one of the things we'll cover tomorrow about how to develop and use your intuition in different situations. Right. So use your intuition to understand. Right. Why I mean, there's some text is there, somebody told you, somebody sent you a handout of a PDF with precepts in it. Why should you believe in it? See for yourself, right? See what difference it makes to your life, right? And see, maybe like a quarter of a pint doesn't make you less mindful, maybe it does, maybe 5 pints doesn't make you less mindful. See the difference, right? Just watch it, see it in your practice, see it in your life, see it in how easy and natural conducive behavior becomes for you. So like maintaining a happy state of mind and taking wholesome action becomes for you versus how much of a struggle it is. So I think that is you should put everything to the test, right? You should not believe someone because they said it. Put everything to the test.
I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Rahul was saying. I mean, it's, for example, harsh speech and slander. harsh speech specifically. There are words that roll out of your mouth in conversation, which are more like adjectives. Unfortunately, in your lexicon, it's more like adjectives rather than actual, let's say, invective that you have directed towards someone. I mean, and getting rid of that for me personally has been, wow, it's a constant struggle on a daily basis, because sometimes you just use it as an adjective and you just don't seem to realize where to stop, or how do you stop? Do you change your entire lexicon? How do you do that?
It's the same thing, right? You see how it is affecting your mind and whether it is worthwhile making that change. That's it. I mean, the test, though nothing written anywhere is set in stone, right? So the rest of the practice, everybody's practicing, they're seeing the difference in their mind, right? They're seeing in their practice what's come up, right? And it's the same thing. You see what happens. That you have to be mindful, you have to be observant, you have to have the spirit of the scientist that the Buddha was, right? He was a scientist of the mind, phenomenological scientist, right? He saw what happened, saw how different things changed it, took a lot of time even after having his awakening to actually create a prescription, which is fine. But all of it is should be put to the test, right? There should be nothing. Maybe there was something missed in translation. Maybe somebody had an agenda, changed the continuity of the things. Maybe the Buddha was wrong about something. Why should you not ask that question, right? So just see it in your experience. See how it makes you feel at the time that you're doing it. So there is a very nice. So in fact, the same sutta where the Buddha talks about the deliberate lie, right? And that if you're once you're down that slippery slope, there's nothing you won't do. So he simply tells Rahul, before you are performing an action, whether it's mental, verbal, or physical, while you're performing it and after you have performed it, see whether it was wholesome, see whether it was beneficial to yourself and to others, see whether it was not for your suffering and for the suffering of others, see whether it leads to wholesome states in the future or unwholesome states in the future. Right? You see that and you choose your course of action, right? Because the Buddha cannot write a prescription for every single thing, that this word can be used in this sentence as an adjective when talked about this person. But if it's talked about another person, it becomes an invective, right? So nobody can write that. So you have to see it in your experience and modify your behavior accordingly, right? See what is right. You will have that sense. And like I said, tomorrow we'll cover more on developing intuition, developing your own compass for this. Okay, it's been a long while today. Let's share some merit and we can have more questions tomorrow as well. Yes, give me. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May enlightened beings of mighty power share in this merit of heart. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sad, sad. Thank you.
Thank you.